What are you expecting from COP27? And it's great that you showed up. Norway relies so much actually on oil and gas. How difficult is the transition?
Well, I mean, the first objective is to keep the pressure for 1.5.
Yeah.
We have to keep that hope alive. Every digit here will matter. So I hope we can deliver result and progress that demonstrate that the world community is moving in that direction.
Do you think we'll get it without China here?
Well, that's a big complication, and the war in Ukraine is another big complication. War is bad for everything, also for climate work. But, first, we have to stay committed to cutting emissions.
Yes.
And Norway, for its part, is reinforcing our pledge. So we will now be at 55 by 2030, together with the rest of Europe. And then we have to make progress on some of these key issues, such as shipping, forests, vulnerable communities. And there are a lot of things going on here which I think can give us hope and inspiration to move forward in the aftermath of the conference.
Prime Minister, cutting 55% emissions from the 1990s is extremely ambitious. How concretely will you achieve this?
Well, we have to move to renewables. Norway is leading that way with offshore wind, which is going to be our major investment, but also, believe it, in solar we can do major progress. We have to succeed in carbon storage, cutting the carbon emissions and store them. Norway has done that for 30 years on our continental shelf, so there's a lot of technology we can bring to scale, and then you have to do it throughout society, in transport, in waste, in energy, with clear targets and with clear incentives. You have to make CO2 far much more expensive, as we are increasing our taxes, and then we have to push the transition, which I believe is possible.
But, Prime Minister, philosophically, you make so much money, right, with one hand, and then you want to do renewables. Is it useful to have high oil and gas prices to be able to fund renewable projects? Do you think it accelerates it, or?
I can tell you that it is not in Norway's interest to have these hikes in energy prices. I'll give you two reasons. Immediately, back home in my country, this is driving up electricity prices, hitting households. Secondly, stability in energy prices at a low level is good for the world economy. It's good for the European economy. So we make every effort to provide Europe with gas in these difficult moments. We have increased gas export from the Norwegian shelf by 8 to 10% over the last months. That is important for storing gas in Europe. But then we have to move forward and push for this renewable transition, which paradoxically, after the war in Ukraine, can come much faster than it had planned. And that's necessary. Yeah, I think it is. I think really the awareness in the European Union that you have to go big on offshore wind, on solar, on hydrogen, on carbon capture and storage, much greater awareness now than only 10 months ago.
Do we have the building blocks to be able to transition?
Yes, we do.
So, are we not lacking cobalt? Are there certain components that we need to be better at getting to scale?
Of course, rare minerals and all of that in part of it with battery factories and so on. But, building the offshore wind installations, be they permanent on the seabed or floating, as we now can do, depends on all the experience we have from the oil and gas industry. So the most complex platforms gives us engineers and workers who can really make these new installations. So it's very much about political will and investment, and Norway will be leading in investing in this because this is the future.
Prime Minister, Norway has also been one of the clear leaders in electric vehicles. Will that continue? How will that continue?
After 2025, you will not buy a fossil car in Norway. And the sales of cars in the last quarter of this year is at 80 to 90% at electrical vehicles. So this is happening, and to do it, you have tax incentives, you have to build the infrastructure for charging, and then people come along.
The winter months are going to be extremely challenging in terms of energy security. Do you worry that Europe will splinter because of this?
I think it's going to be a tough winter. I think now with the gas storage in place, I think we are, pretty safe, but it's going to be hard for European industry. Prices will be still not very stable. Ukraine will be suffering. We are trying to see how we can support Ukraine in getting gas for their use. So I think it's going to be hard, but I think politically it has been remarkable during these months that politically Europe has been very consistent in supporting Ukraine. And we are a small European country, we are neighboring Russia, and we are sending a clear message. We can not let that happen. We cannot let a big country use its military force to invade the neighboring country, and as we see before our eyes now, bombing this country, its infrastructure, its energy and its water. So it's important to stay united politically. And then hopefully at one day this terrible war can end and Ukraine can have its right. And I hope that will happen at the negotiating table.
So what should be the main message? If you're a politician in Europe today, your biggest challenge is probably to get the citizens behind you in these tough winter months.
If we do this separately, we will all lose. So we have to have strong cooperation, securing energy coming in. Here Norway can contribute. Then we have to have burden sharing, so that if we have to use less energy, let's do that together. And then we have to push in a big way for these new renewables. Because the shortage we will have now in a couple of years is a pause. And then we may have a lot of energy if we really invest and build. And around the North Sea, you have Norway, UK, Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and then Denmark and Sweden. We can build a network of offshore wind, which, you know, in a few years' time will be there providing our economies with energy.
That will happen?
That will happen.
That will 100% happen. There's commitment from
we have made the pledge. We will build 30 gigawatts of hydro wind coming from our shelf. That means that we will go from 5 to 1,500 big windmills. And the plans are being laid out from now and through the 2030s. And then that has to coexist with gas, because gas is a stabilizing energy when you go for sun, solar and wind. But in order to do gas, and gas can also give us hydrogen, we need to capture the carbon from the gas and store it. And Norway now has a full value chain that can deliver that service. We can capture gas from waste plants, from the hard to abate industries, from cement, or from gas production, and we can store it 3,000 meters under the seabed, and it stays.
Prime Minister, given all of these challenges, do you think inflation is coming down a little bit? Is that hopeful, or do you see the signs in the economy?
Well, that's the main priority now for me, is to make this inflation chapter as short as possible. So, you know, the central banks do their job, and interest rates have gone from zero to a high level, and we have to hold back in our budget policies, not to push that. So I hope when we get into 2023 that it will stabilize and then hopefully can come down. But you know, there's an unknown factor here, which is the war. And war is bad for the economy, it's bad for the climate, it's bad for people, and it has to end.
So how do you expect inflation? The trend is what, lower inflation, or actually inflation staying at, you know, a little bit lower but then staying high for quite some months?
It depends. You cannot have inflation running into the 2 digits. It has to come down, you know. So it has to stabilize and then come down, so that households and businesses can plan predictably on the future. Inflation is bad for planning, and we have to get it down.